What up YouTube? This is John Helm with Helm Woodshop and Smithy back with another video. On the last episode, you watched me make oh that's right in front of my face. When I first made these, they were 90-degree cuts on this piece of red oak, but that corner was really sharp and I was worried that it would tear up the cardboard sleeves on the client's records that he's gonna be sliding in and out of here. So I went ahead and chamfered the edges off with a 45-degree router bit. And then I thought, well, he's not just gonna be putting them in, he's gonna be pulling them out. So I need to chamfer the back edge as well. So let's go ahead and do that before we start working on the boxes. An easier route to go to get rid of those sharp edges would be just to allow them to get rounded over while I was sanding it down. But that would have removed lines from the front of the furniture, and this is a fairly simple piece, and lines on a piece of furniture are like curves on a woman. You want to see them bad boys. So by doing a 45-degree chamfer, I'm actually adding lines to the piece, which will make it more interesting visually, and it'll also help with the functionality, obviously, since he won't be tearing his records up quite as quickly. And so now, with no further ado, I can start building the boxes onto these face frames. Let's get to it. The two jigs that you just watched me use were the Craig Rip Cut and the Craig AccuCut jigs. The Rip Cut is just like bringing a table saw to your piece of wood instead of putting your piece of wood on a table saw. So if you don't have a table saw, or you have a little dinky one like mine that you can't wrestle a 4x8 sheet of plywood onto, these are absolutely invaluable. You can make pretty accurate cuts, much more accurate than you would be able to do with a handheld circular saw without them. And they are quick, easy. They're actually accurate enough to build a set of cabinets with. But because I have a better quality cut on my table saw than I do with a little handheld saw, obviously, I cut these a little bit big, and then I bring them over the table saw, get them down to their final dimensions, now that they're a manageable size. So these two pieces that you just watched me cut are going to be the outside pieces, which are going to be visible on the storage cabinet. Now, I'm using hardwood plywood for those, obviously, because you can see them and we want them to look nice. But hardwood ply is only hardwood on the outside. The inside of it is just regular ass plywood. So for the inside pieces, which I'm going to be completely covering with hardwood ply, I'm just going to use regular construction plywood. Be sure when you buy that plywood that it is dry. A lot of times you get it and it is soaking wet, and that obviously isn't going to work. Plywood is much more stable than regular wood, but if it's that wet, you are going to get some shrinking and warping as it dries, so you definitely don't want to assemble your piece with plywood that hasn't been sitting out long enough. Luckily, I do have some plywood that has been sitting out here for 6 or 7 months. It feels nice and dry. It is good enough to go with, so that's what we're going to do. Now that I have those pieces rough cut, I'm going to attach the boards onto the sides that are going to help house the shelves. So how this is going to work is, here is the edge of a piece of plywood. I need a new Sharpie. Crap. So how this is going to work is, here is the edge of a piece of plywood, and on there I'm going to attach some little pieces of 1/2-inch plywood and leave little 3/4 inch gaps in between them so that the shelves can sit in there. And I'm going to attach these now before I turn these pieces to their final dimensions. The reason for that is that anytime you do a glue up, or even if you're just screwing two boards together, it's really hard to get them flush. And so I'm gonna go ahead and stick them on. That way when I put them through the table saw, these edges will be perfectly flat and they will join up to our face frames well. Also, the pieces on the sides need to have these boards stop just a hair more than 1/2 inch from the back edge, so that it can accommodate the piece of wood that will go on the back. The pieces in the middle will be cut off at this length so that the back plate can sit on nice and flush, and we won't have to do any bending of the wood to get it to go into place. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these 1/2 inch pieces of plywood cut up, then we're gonna glue them on, and then we'll take over to the table saw and get them trimmed to their final dimension. And with the magic of video editing, all these pieces are cut and ready to assemble in a matter of seconds. I got one of these boards here on the bottom just a little bit out of place when I was putting it on this last side. And of course, since I'm spacing them, that issue continuously transferred all the way up, and it got worse and worse as I moved up. So one thing that you can do is take a clamp and push it into place, as long as you catch it real quickly before the glue dries, and then put in a few more brads to hold it in place, and it ceases to be an issue. It's a quick fix if you screw up like I just did, which I shouldn't have done. It was a complete rookie mistake. But it works surprisingly well. It's really easy to bend these back into place because these brad nails, they really don't provide a whole lot of support. They're really just there to hold it in place while the glue dries. All right, these are all put together, so it's time to rip them down on the table saw. Now that I have those trimmed to their final dimensions, it's time to start taking measurements so we can cut the shelves for this piece. It is extremely important that these cuts be as accurate as humanly possible. If they're not, you're going to have a little bit of play where the shelves are supposed to sit, and we don't want that. We want it to be a nice, snug fit. Not too tight, not too loose. You want them to lock right into place without having to fight to get them in there. And so because of that, I try to use a tape measure as little as possible when I'm doing this step. That might sound silly, to try not to use measuring tools when you are trying to get accurate measurements, but you have to remember when you're taking measurements, especially if you're just going to be using a tape measure or even a ruler or a yardstick, that every time you take a measurement, you're going to be just a little bit off. Even if it's just 128th of an inch, it's going to be a little bit off. And as you go down your piece, that measurement is going to magnify how much out of place those pieces of wood are. So instead of using measuring tools, of course I'm going to have to use them at some point, but I try to use the actual piece as the measuring tool. Let me show you how I do that. I have some offcuts from those pieces that I just trimmed, and I'm going to use the offcuts as a reference for where those are going to be placed on here. Because these are 3/4 inch plywood, but they're not exactly 3/4 of an inch. They're 3/4 of an inch when they were made. And before they take the logs and put them on the roller that cuts out these plies, they soak them in water so that they're easier to cut. So even though they were 3/4 of an inch at the factory where they were produced, once they've dried out, they are not 3/4 of an inch. Let's see how wide they actually are. All right, we're off by about 3/64 of an inch on these. And 3/64 of an inch off here, not the biggest deal, but then it's going to be double that here. you're gonna add another 3/64 of an inch every time you go down the piece. And then by the end, you're off by over 1/8 of an inch. And that is a big deal. So I'm gonna take these pieces of plywood. I have 3 pieces of the construction plywood and 2 pieces of the oak. And I'll put the oak on the outside where the oak slats are going to go. And the construction ply where it is going to go. Get these nice and centered. Now at this stage, it's okay to just eyeball it because I'm going to slowly work down pieces until they fit in here perfectly. Now what I'll do is take some more offcut pieces. I will cut them to 15 1/4 inches, which will probably be just a little bit too big. And then I'll stick them in place, slide all these together, and make sure that these are still centered. If they're a little bit too big, I'll go over to the table saw, set my fence, and shave them down just a hair, and I'll continuously do that until the fit is perfect. And at that point, my table saw will be set up at the perfect measurement for these shelves. Exactly 15 1/4 inches long. Perfect. Now I'll just slide them into place, right where our shelves are going to go. Let's take a look at it. All right, this piece looks like it is just about perfectly centered, which means that when these are all pulled tightly, we should have the same measurement between the outside of these pieces of plywood and the edge of the face frame. So these are too wide. I'm gonna shave a hair off them, do the whole thing over again. All right, I took just a little bit off of every one of those. Let's have a look here. So we have the table saw set to the perfect width for the shelves on this piece. We can go ahead and rip down our boards. Cordless saws are really convenient until the battery goes out. With the shelves rough cut, now I'm ready to go over to the table saw and clean them up. I'm also going to cut some thinner strips of wood to the same width to use as spacers for the top. Alright, now that all those pieces are hopefully cut to the perfect dimensions, it's time to do a test fit before we stain, seal, and assemble. My shop is not adequate for professional cabinet or furniture making. That doesn't mean that I can't make professional quality cabinets or furniture, it just means that it's going to be a lot more work and it's going to take me a lot longer. There's a lot of problem solving involved. Things aren't as straightforward as they would be in a professional cabinetry or furniture shop. I got my start in woodworking as a teenager. I think I was 14 or 15 years old, and I got a job in a cabinet shop making mostly slot machine bases. This was in Mississippi, and there are a lot of casinos there. And also shortly after I started, there was Hurricane Katrina, and the first things that got rebuilt were the casinos. So we were really busy making those slot machine bases, and I could throw together a huge amount of cabinets in a day because there was a CNC. So all of this cutting that I have done right now would have taken me a couple hours. Now, my shop may not be a professional quality shop, but it's probably a lot better than the shops that a lot of you have at home in your own garages. Of course, it's probably not as nice as some of the shops that y'all also have. But with that being said, don't look at the tools that you have at your disposal and think, oh, I can't make such and such. Because yeah, you can. You could make all of this with some planes, some chisels, and some hand saws. It would take forever and it would be extraordinarily tedious and you would probably hate your life and have a million blisters and splinters, but you can do it. You can always do it. It's just a matter of how much time you're willing to put into it. Anyway, it is time for me to shut up and stop babbling and start doing this dry fit. Let's get started. This isn't only going to take a long time because I don't have an adequate shop. It's going to take a long time because I am tremendously stupid. I did something so stupid. This piece of wood is 16¼ inches long. This one is 14¼ inches long. And I put them on backwards on every single one of these. So stupid. Way to create more work for yourself, John. So I can fix this, but it's gonna take forever. So as you can see, this is quite a process. Every one of these that I have to remove takes anywhere from 6 to 15 minutes. And there are 32 of them. Good times. I have made plenty of mistakes when I've been in the middle of a project before, but I've never made this particular mistake. But I can tell you this, I will never do it again. Crisis averted. I have the pieces all dry fitted up. And nothing is worse for the wear, which I really was afraid I was gonna have to remake this whole piece. And that would have sucked. I am not a big fan of making the face frames and then fitting the boxes up to them. Definitely not gonna be using that method again. Next build, I'm definitely gonna go back to my old way of doing things. So don't forget to join me next time when I will be puttying, sanding, staining, sealing, and assembling these pieces. And don't forget to comment, like, subscribe, and hit the bell. Till then, y'all have a good one.